Good morning, everyone, or good evening. We want to thank you all for being willing to participate as a co-creative on a regenerative economy and society to jointly inspire the world's future. Let your questions on the comments or your comments too in the comment section, and we will answer them if we have still time for it, okay? My name is Liliana Domingues. I'm the founder and the managing director of Amar na Vida, and I'm going to be the moderator of this panel. With me is also Beatriz Silva. She's the marketing coordinator of the Amar na Vida too. And we are very pleased to have with us in this opening session Louise Roper. And also later, we think we are going to have Giles Hutchins to give us his inputs about the theme from sustainability to regeneration, how to drive positive change at unprecedented pace and scale. From this beautiful place that we are in Lisbon, that is Fábrica Braço de Prata, that is here with us. We want to congratulate to have Louise, that is in Denmark on her vacation. Thank you, Louise. And Louise is CEO of Poland, is an experienced leader and passionate advocate for business as instrumental driver of positive change. She started her career in the tech industry, in many companies of tech. Since then, she has been successful launching, running, and advising cradle-to-cradle and circular economy brands across Europe. So, Louise, during your career, and thank you so much once again for being here, you have always been involved with tech industry and big corporates. So how you did get involved with regeneration and sustainability issues since you came from such a business background? Could you tell us a little bit about it, please?
Sure. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Liliana, both for having me and for the amazing job you're doing with Amar na Vida and pulling this together. It's such important work. I'm thrilled to be able to jump in this morning. Yes, I'm Louise. I'm in Denmark right now. And I think when I was thinking about why did I end here, that was a great question. I think like many others, you connect to children when you're growing up, as a child, when you're connecting to nature. And for me, it was through horses. My grandmother had a horse and I spent a lot of time, camping out at night, looking after them and so on. And sort of that experience has always stayed with me, but has been parked for a long time. And so really, I did my degree, and it was really only after I finished my degree, which was philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford, I went traveling in Vietnam, and that had a really big effect on me. About a month I spent, and two things in particular. One was the way that this amazing, beautiful landscape, and especially the coastline. I remember there was a little town called Nha Trang. And we were there and I saw the beauty and then saw sewage and waste washed up, plastic even at the time, and it was quite a few years ago now, I'm afraid. And that was astounding to me that could have happened, because clearly it wasn't from the locals. It was coming from Europe and other places. And the second thing that Vietnam trip did for me was the generosity and the happiness and fulfillment of the people. Made it really obvious they had less in inverted commas than any of us, and yet they were more successful at life. So it was the first thing. Good morning, Giles.
Frank is here with us too. He just wanted to join us. It's okay. Go ahead.
But this idea that it became really obvious to me that the linear economics that I'd been taught at university was wrong. And that there was this dimension missing, that more isn't always better. And of course, I'm ashamed, no, I'm not, that I didn't do what Kate Raworth did, which was brilliantly start a different branch of economics and a different approach. Instead, to be honest, I went home and I started normal work. And I started in a consultancy in Copenhagen, working with corporates. And what I learned there was really the power that business has to change. We did, both to change politics and regulation, but also just to change the environment we live in. And because I love innovation and I love new things, I became sort of part of the tech boom. So I worked with IBM, with Cisco before Cisco was born, properly as a big company. I remember John Chambers, the CEO, saying he wanted Cisco to be so well known that if you didn't understand what they did, you knew them. And that's where they are now, right? So it was very new. And I even met my British husband with Cisco in San Jose. And so I moved back to the UK and continued with this new thing. I helped launch cybersecurity, working for the founders of a firewall company. Again, always new things that didn't really exist. But it really wasn't until I had children that I took a time to reflect back and realize. And then I was very lucky because I got the opportunity to be part of launching Method cleaning products, now part of Method Equiver, into Europe. So I was part of that startup team, a company that had a purpose. It was the first time really I had heard of a company with a ethical purpose, with a culture, with innovation, cradle to cradle, one of the first corporations. And really that kind of, I love that. And I think all of us who were there at the time felt part of something very new. We launched in 2007 the first 100% post-consumer recycled plastic packaging. That's a long time ago, but again, small scale. So I swapped the big corporates for challenger brands, and then after that was headhunted to launch another challenger brand with compostable nappies, diapers into Europe. And then from there, I saw the cradle to cradle again. I'm a geek, so I went from technology geek to cradle to cradle geek.
Wow, that's an amazing jump.
Into seeing that even if you have the most amazing product, if you don't have the system that can deal with it, be it recycling or compostable nappies that would disappear, then you have a problem. It's a systems change. And that's really how systems became important to me. But again, I think most people have that, and some of us feel guilty. I felt guilty afterwards. But why didn't I start my career in just regeneration, in sustainability? But really, I draw on my experience with big corporates and with challenger brands, putting it all together now with the work we do at Volans, where we help transform big companies towards regeneration, really. So
all makes sense.
Sort of. When you look back, you can make this story make sense, but at the time, not so much.
So you are CEO of Volans, which in fact is founded by John Ecklington, who is, for the ones that don't know, is considered the world authority on corporate sustainability and sustainable development. How do you actually at Volans work this issue of transitioning from sustainability, which actually was a concept somehow developed also by John, to regeneration? How do you work with organizations regarding this transition? Because regeneration is a little bit ahead of than sustainability. How do you do that?
Let me take a step back. So first of all, yes, I'm really privileged. I was so lucky to be able to lead Volans, and the team is great. And of course, it's a privilege to work with John, who has been in this field for 40 odd years, and he's so insightful. So we spend a lot of time looking at what's coming, not just a bit ahead, but really in the future. What are the trends, the disruptions that are going to come at companies? What are the challenges, the opportunities? And I guess what we talk about for the 2020s, this decade, and we've seen the beginning of it, is that this is the exponential decade, where things that have been bubbling under the surface are going to just take off and suddenly manifest into reality everywhere. So we talk a lot about this, and, fact is the future is arriving fast paced at different, China especially is hitting it first, really. But it's coming for all of us. And there's a young climate activist I did some work with, George Bond, and he said to me, he said, well, the reason I'm doing climate activism is the disruption is coming. It's just whether we want to help shape the next future. And that's really why, we work with organizations to do that. And because every single organization, whether you are private, public, finance, whether you're a social enterprise or small, big, all of us are going to have to transform. And you have to be asking, what is the value we bring to society on the triple bottom line and so on. And so that's the work we do, really. And when it comes to the move from sustainability to regeneration, you mentioned kindly that the triple bottom line, or the focus on people, planet, as well as profit. John sort of coined that term, or started making it popular back in 1994. And so 2 years ago, we looked and said, oh, it's almost 25 years.
Yeah.
What has happened since? And that, because that's what we do. We look at trends and so on. And we realized that a lot of things have changed since then. The B Corp movement I talked about, which is doing an amazing job, has really come out of measuring impact across things, social, environmental, as well as financial. But really, when we looked at it, we thought, okay, so if companies are fish in the sea, these fish over the last 25 years have got a lot cleaner. They're more beautiful, more shiny. But still they swim in this ocean that's dirty because they are still being measured only truly on profits. And even the best companies have stuck with, or mostly, there are very few exceptions, but they have stuck with being responsible, with doing less harm, not, and saying, okay, so we're minimizing our bad impacts. We're minimizing up. We might give some money to give some good impact too, but really it's about minimizing badness. And so we launched the Tomorrow's. Well, actually, John then recalled the triple bottom line, said it's not working. Let's review it, and we launched what we called the Tomorrow's Capitalism Inquiry, which was to say, okay, so these businesses, these fish in the sea, how can they help clean it? How can companies be successful catalysts of systemic change? And we came up with conclusions on different functions and different pieces that companies could do. And then we looked back again at the triple bottom line and said, is it useless? Do we need to scrap it? And what we saw was no, but it just has only come to responsibility. It has not really helped with resilience, with companies being resilient to the climate and the environment that's coming at us now. And it's coming fast. And it hasn't acknowledged that companies should not just do less harm, they should actively add value to the bigger system, which of course is regeneration, is encourage sort of the flourishing of the whole system is important for survival. And that's a complete mindset shift. So that's how we are looking at it, that the triple bottom line was still our starting point, but it needs to move across the responsibility lens, the resilience lens, and importantly, and most importantly, regeneration lens, not just in agriculture or but in societal terms, in people, as well as in environment.
And you have been seeing more with this COVID thing, an upgrading of that regarding the companies that you deal. You have some examples that you can share with us?
Yeah. So I have examples, but funnily enough, those examples are not COVID.
Okay, they are before.
Yeah, they are before. So I have to say COVID has increased the amount of people, which is great, the amount of companies coming to us and saying, we can see we need to look at our purpose, like what should we be doing? And then we encourage them to go regeneration. But really the ones that I could example. So for example, we've been working with the Spanish company Acciona, who are a big infrastructure company.
I know it well.
Oh, do you? Good. There we go. You're an engineer. So we've been working with them since last year on upgrading their sustainability to regeneration. And what does that mean for them as a company? And it's, it's challenging, not for them, but it's challenging in general, because to say, how do we fit into the big system? You have to, it's not just enough to change your products. You have to change your culture. You have to look at all the different pieces. So we've been working with them, with a group of exponential leaders, we call them, from all across their organization, to come up with their strategic focus for the next 5-10 years, which is along how can Acciona drive regeneration, drive positive impact, not just reduce bad.
But you can give a specific kind of example how something that could inspire other companies to at least do something different, to know better what is this actually, to transition from sustainability to regeneration.
So for example, so instead of saying we are building a bridge here, and some taking a step back and saying, actually, we're providing an expanded community here. And what does that mean? And what is the value of that bridge, not just for moving from one side to the other of a valley or whatever, but can that help both environmental, but also the communities flourish in a different way? What are the opportunities? So it's spending more time kind of going, so what, I think. You make something. I've heard some companies, there was a healthcare company we worked with recently who said, but we do healthcare, so we do good anyway. And the example there is, okay, but what happens when your product has been delivered? What happens to the people around it? Does it change the system in a bigger way? Is there new opportunities provided, either when the product is delivered, but also how the product is made, of course? So you have to look at the bigger piece. It's hard to, and I would argue, nobody's really doing it perfectly so far. Yeah. Another example would be, and again, this is a startup, so it's the other side of the spectrum.
Oh, nice. You also have startups on it, just not big corporate.
Is a company called the Good Growth Company, where they have gone, they are creating from Mongolian cashmere, really from the yak. But instead, right now, what has been happening is companies have come in and said, oh, we'll buy the cashmere, thank you very much. But they're not thinking about what's happening to the animals or the soil in the Mongolian steppe. So they are saying, okay, instead of starting with the product, let's start with the ecosystem and say, what's the value here? How do we create a soil strategy for the next 100 years? So, and that has meant, maybe it's not just yak, maybe it's also camel wool, maybe it's using different crops that you can grow. So they're looking at it from the local ecosystem. Again,
okay,
that assumption that I know you will talk about, that we're part of this living system. And if we start with that, rather than what we're trying to extract from it, and then you can create. And so what they're doing is they're creating an ecosystem of suppliers and of wool mills that can so that they're linking the whole piece together, rather than saying, we're just going to do this, thank you very much, and we're not going to worry about what happens to the Mongolian soil in 100 years. So I think the assumption is look broader and look longer into the future. Yeah. And, some people talk about it as the fact that the future has to be a stakeholder. When we do stakeholder analysis, if we don't have future in there in a real way on equal footing with the now and the quarterly results, then we're not going to be regenerative.
Okay. But you think it's from a selfless point of view? Or it's just like, okay, I'm doing because in the next generations I will still need it. Somehow I would like to understand that. Your perception. You can say it for real, Nika. Nobody's listening to us.
I hope they are. So is it selfless? I think it has to be a mixture. I think we have to awaken this feeling that is beautiful, that we are part of something bigger, both our local community, as well as the planet and so on. The planet seems very far out for most people. which is why one of the reasons it's taken so long to act, I believe. But if we can start enjoying being part of something bigger, and that's why the human angle is so important, because we will flourish more selfishly as humans if we are part of something bigger and actively providing something selflessly. So I think it's a real balance. In terms of companies, what we're seeing is some people are scared. Some people who come to us know that if they don't change, they will not survive.
Really?
Yeah. They can see, they don't know how to, this is especially big companies, if they can see that they're being threatened both by startups, but also by potential regulation, by the mood of environment issues, in particular environment issues. And they are acting mostly from fear. Others are acting, and I think these are the best ones, the visionary CEOs that you speak to are reacting because they have taken the whole self into their job. So they have been challenged mostly by a child, a grandchild, a nephew, somebody in there, and mostly it's the younger generation that we have to listen to, and who say, really, you were part of this? What did you do? And they have taken that on board in a real way and realized you can't separate out, oh, I'm CEO 10 hours a day or 12 hours a day. You're also part of a family and part of this, and they are the ones who you, in my opinion, you see making visionary statements and pushing forward. And sometimes all you have to do is say, is making that commitment, saying we are going to do this, and then the whole company panics because there's no plan, and the journalists say, oh, but there's no plan, so it's really risky. But at least you've leadership is so much about intention and wanting to do it, not saying that you've got all the answers right now. But it's scary. So again, I'm very privileged because we tend to work with those leaders who are brave and visionary and sort of want to push the boat out. And then we have those conversations with them on how can they best do it with their particular organization, because no organization, of course, is the same.
I'm very happy to listening to you saying that about how leaders, big ones, are really engaging with this. So I'm happy for that. Meanwhile, maybe Giles, we had a question here to do between you and Giles, but maybe we can do it later when he joins. And so we go ahead, because I also have another question for you about the stakeholders, knowing that its importance that they play out and this big thing, which is regeneration, since he's co-creating with nature too. And we know that companies that really engage with all stakeholders, it's not only the employees, but it's all the thing. All is an ecosystem. You mentioned that it's seen as an ecosystem, but actually in nature you have some types of relationships. You have symbiotic, mutualistic. So how you really with the companies, and we know that you have the net zero initiative that you engage banks, business, or regulators, so a lot of stakeholders. So how you are inspired by nature to create this kind of relationship? I have to provoke yourself. Do you work like the bees?
Like the bees. So it's funny you should say that, because we talk a lot about being pollinators.
That's nice.
And our logo is a hummingbird. Which of course is a great
pollinator.
So I think we try and pollinate both language and ideas across the different stakeholders and try and know enough. Again, I'm not an expert, so when we launch Bankers for Net Zero, I'm not a banking expert at all, but I know enough that I can talk to the bankers and bring them together with businesses and say, okay, so what's the reason? How can we open the flow of cash, which is what this project is about? How can this flow be opened to support transformation towards net zero? That's it. So it's about pollinating and about being willing to be provocative, to catalyze a change. It's one of the reasons at Volans I keep the company very small, because we can walk away first of all, if and we can say, kind of speak truth to power, not in the same way as some of the young climate activists like Greta Thunberg are doing, speaking truth to power, but we can be provocative and work in ways that are maybe a little bit strange to regulators and business and banks, to start conversations they wouldn't have if they were still in a boardroom. So we do a lot of, I call them mind exercises, where we try and just open people's possibility to wonder and see opportunities in a different way, rather than seeing from their one point of view they are in.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So inspired by nature in that sense is more. It's more about connections, I guess, in that particular way. But really, it's about getting everybody and it's back to humans. It's about getting everybody to flourish where they are, so they feel safe. We create safe space, that it's okay if you come to this Bankers for Net Zero as a bank and you don't have all the answers and you're not perfect on sustainability. The fact that you've come into the conversation and are asking businesses, how can we do better? And then you're asking regulators, hey, if you change these things in the laws, we have a better way of providing money to the things we want to provide money for. If you're willing to have that conversation, so we try and create safe space, that it's okay to be who you are and participate.
So you think that also another thing that's important could be that each one knows very well its own role and value that they can add to the ecosystem as a whole? You think that?
Yes. Sorry, I think that's hugely important. And sometimes that's and I think that's where, funnily enough, where people talk a lot about purpose. That's where purpose can come in if you know what you're doing and how that plays in to the ecosystem as a whole, to society as a whole, whichever system we're looking at, big lens, small lens, then it's okay what other people are doing. There's less competition, there's less feeling of power play. And I think actually with COVID, with the crisis that we're in the middle of in the next few years, there's this opening and people are more willing, partly because of fear, but people are more willing to re-examine their own place in this system and to engage and collaborate in deeper ways.
Mm-hmm. And that's great. So we still have hope.
Yeah, I'm an optimist, or very hopeful at least.
But do you see any change from before COVID and now? You see changes for the better or for the worse? Regarding even the stakeholder thing, the engagement of things, how you see it?
I think there are risks and opportunities. Overall, I am hopeful because I do think that people have been forced to re-examine where they are, and that's a good thing. The risk is that there's a retreat into just doing what we've been doing and what we do well and head down. But actually, if governments, and this is what for me is really interesting, and I know we talked about it the other day, you and I, but that governments can play a bigger role now in encouraging companies to go in the right direction, because we need governments to help fix the crisis. So many companies who have previously said, "Oh, no, I'm fine," because of COVID, they've needed government support. So now there's a whole new role for governments to start playing.
So there's a huge role of governments as regulators.
Yes, very much. And what's interesting is, so we've been working with one regulator in Scotland, the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, and their CEO, again, one of the visionary CEOs I know, and they're transforming themselves from being a regulator. You would say, from providing, this is the law, and if you don't do it, we will take you to court and give you fines, to providing a service that says, but here's some consultancy. Here's how you as a business, as an industry, could collaborate to not just obey the law, but regenerate and be part of a bigger ecosystem and a bigger solution to the problems we have. Mm-hmm. And so so regulators have a more important role. Plus, they could actually step into advising, not completely, not against consultants like you, but really to bring together the players on place-based solutions. Mm-hmm. To regenerate, because we know that's necessary. We know that we have to look at place-based, and we have to have different types of stakeholders engaged, be it local government, companies, society, and so on.
Okay, great. So we're still waiting. I think Giles will join us. I will pass to Beatrice. She has a question for you.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Hi. So I do have a question for you, and that would be, for the younger generations that are going in the near future, embrace their careers, how would you describe the transition from the traditional business world to one that is more regenerative?
Thank you. That's a wonderful question. It's very close to my heart. Especially as I mentioned before, I have children who are in this stage of going in to higher education and business just now. And I think on the sad front, you as younger people are caught between two systems right now. We have a system that's existing, but it's breaking down. And yet it's still continuing. Education seems to be the same. Junior jobs seem to be the same. But by the time you're, slightly further into your career, it will be all changed. So there will be more of an emphasis on not what you know, not the data that you know, but how your qualities, how you collaborate, how you can be empathetic, how you can imagine yourself in different systems, and I think crucially, we will see a big shift, and I think COVID has helped this a lot, to bringing your whole self to work. So there will be less of a delineation between this is work, this is play, because you will be able to take your personal interests and your strengths and your weaknesses into your job. So for anybody young, what I encourage them to do is to keep learning, to be furiously curious, and try and put yourself into as many different positions as possible. Have a sniff at what is it like in a government or regulatory environment. Big company, small company, finance. If you can have any experience in those, the time of expertise is not coming to an end, because we need brilliant people who know how to build bridges and solve medical crises, etc. However, for lots and lots of people, it's going to be the intersections between stakeholders that's where the interesting things are going to happen. So I was talking to somebody 3 days ago here in Copenhagen, and who was in banking, and we were talking about that the sustainability in banking still, and I think it's the same in many companies, is quite separate to the product and the commercial bit of banking, and to be able to connect the two, because you understand. And you don't become somebody that the bankers don't listen to because you sound like a crazy environmentalist. And likewise, you're not just focused on finance. If you can be that bridge point, so putting yourself in that position where you're taking a more holistic view, that would be my future. I think it has to be for regeneration.
Great.
So I don't know, Ranko, if you're still there, you can ask some question, but we are waiting for Giles, but we continue. But now if you want to join and ask the question, you can.
There you go. Hello.
Actually, Ranko wanted to participate. He's also a speaker. He's from Croatia. So, Ranko, you can go ahead, present a little bit.
Nice to meet you.
And we have him, so in this regard, you can go ahead.
Very happy to be with you, all of you. I'm very happy to hear all the ideas and work you are doing. And I'm also kind of doing a lot of similar things. So I would like to maybe ask you about something which is maybe something that is coming to my mind that I'm thinking about. I like your approach of provoking people, because we need to move from one mindset to another mindset, and it's kind of difficult. We have this inertia of thinking and working in one culture, and need to go to another culture. But what I sometimes use, and it proves helpful, is provoking to the level that they uh, uh, start to understand regeneration as a new business opportunity, as a new uh, marketing strategy, new business development strategy, because I believe they're all kind of afraid for the future. They don't know how to manage all these uncertainties of the crises that are coming: climate crisis, political crisis, demographic crisis, economic crisis, COVID crisis, all sorts of crises. So sometimes maybe it's useful from my point of view if we go even deeper and then then try to provoke them in a sense. Okay, you have a business, you have a public interest or whatever kind of sector you are working in, and then actually how you can use this situation to make it an opportunity for even more prosperity, for more income, for more income streams. Actually, this is something which is bringing them even deeper into understanding that this is not just a cost. This is kind of a way how they can develop in a more sustainable, more regenerative way. So actually, do you maybe see this as a solution also for this client you are working with, and do you see maybe as a new narrative you can use when approaching different stakeholders and trying to get them on board of the regenerative processes? That's my kind of question, but also kind of comment and suggestion. Yeah, so if you understand.
Yes, no, I agree with you. I think there is definitely the opportunity, the opportunity driver is definitely there, especially as we're seeing some market opportunities that used to be there and that companies have taken for granted is crumbling. As you say, with this crisis and that crisis, it's hugely, it's a great one. And actually, the company I mentioned earlier, Acciona, one of the things they identified through the program we came up with was certain areas where they feel there's a whole new market that nobody's looking at linked to regeneration within some of their business units. So I think that's really right. And if I could say I think that's where, again, bringing in regulators, but where EU in particular and the new taxonomies are helpful because they serve as flags, especially to big companies, that this is coming, and they start with taxonomy and incentives and extra support, but soon that will be punitive legislation. So if they don't start moving towards regeneration in a proper way, so I think it's that combination of opportunity as well as regulation and fear, as you say, that any leader worth their salt knows that uncertainty is the only thing that's certain for the next few years, really. So yeah, no, I completely agree. I'd love to hear more about what you do as well after, maybe.
Ask you. Oh, Giles.
Hello.
Happy to see you. Hello.
Morning.
Good morning.
Oh,
Actually,
yeah. Can you hear me all right?
Yes. Good morning. Yeah, I'm getting nervous. You're not up here, okay? So thank you for being here. Giles actually is going to be one of the speakers of the speaker the next session. But we have here a question for both of you, okay? So that's very happy to have you both. So the question is, how do we envision at these unprecedented times the role of big corporates as drivers of positive change towards a regenerative economy? So the question is kind of both of you, but also Ranko, if you want to somehow share, totally free for it. We're happy to have you all here, so would be appreciated to hear you about it.
Giles, I've been talking a lot, so why don't you start answering?
Well, I'll be honest. I'm new to this conversation. I've just appeared, so it would
Yeah.
be actually quite nice to hear from you, Louise, and hear what you've been up to. I assumed I was just coming in to listen, actually, but
Oh, you can listen.
yeah, no, I'm happy to.
Yeah, we can tag team it. We've talked a little bit about corporates and how they can drive big change, and I think, for me, there is still a huge role for corporates to drive change. And even though in the last 25 years, as I said, it's been very much around the responsibility within their own supply chains and so on, there is a role for the innovative piece, actually, of regeneration that will only come from companies, either big corporates, but also some of the challenger brands. But the thing that's different now, I would argue, and you won't be surprised to hear this, Liliana and Beatriz, is that it's the interaction between companies and other key stakeholders that's going to come into the spotlight. So, companies are going to have to be more activist in not just lobbying for less legislation, but positively engaging with governments, with regulators, with society and their customers, their employees. And I want to say, as well as nature and the future. So that for me is the biggest shift, is we've allowed somehow business to sit in its own silo for a while, do a bit of lobbying for their own good, and do some bits and pieces for society as long as they're getting customers. But really, to be catalysts for systemic change, they have to be activists. They have to engage in a much bigger way with other stakeholders, and that will be really new. So again, back to what the youth should do, that figuring out how do you become that connector, I think is really interesting. Go on, Giles. Now, does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that, really. I think. I mean, let's be honest. The idea of the corporate notion has actually done very well. It's adapted and evolved very successfully over many decades. It hasn't obviously included all of its impacts, and that's part of what the sustainability movement has been trying to achieve. But I think in terms of looking at the corporation as an idea and how it's developing, I think this whole shift from the organization's machine to recognizing that it's actually a complex adaptive system is really important in seeing the future of the corporation. And to your point, how does that corporation then interrelate with its stakeholders? So something quite significant is happening very quickly, which is that we're shifting from, there's massive change happening. There's waves of change coming down. Apologies, it seems my internet is not as fast as it could be on this platform, so sorry about that. It's all right, is it? Okay. So we got these massive changes coming down, big waves, and one of them, digital, the move to digital, is really affecting the corporate mentality. So the sort of shift from kind of control or trying to dominate a market through monopoly and then sort of maintain that is having to be adjusted, because digital means that innovation then becomes quite important, because we're moving to much flatter structures. So I'm doing some work with some property companies, some finance companies at the moment, some fast-moving consumer good companies, and all of there, depending on whatever the value chain, all of those value chains are being shifted. So essentially, from that kind of linear structure to not just value matrices anymore, but actually kind of communities, micro enterprises, where in those micro enterprises are customers, are, as you say, which are need some form of activism to engage them in some way. There are suppliers, there are partners, they're all in that micro enterprise together, sharing and learning through a community environment. So the sharing economy, shifting from just sharing tools and techniques to actually then being in providing services, or actually the way in which you engage with the service is upgrading the service because of the level of adaptability due to digitization. So that, coupled with then purpose or sustainability, means that the very nature of purpose itself is having to change from something that has traditionally been seen as something quite static. Let's design purpose, let's have our mission statement and so forth, and then we're done, and that will hopefully appeal to people, to actually recognizing that actually purpose isn't a noun, it's a verb, in terms of a way of being, but it's actually more than a verb. It's what you might call a participle, a non-finite verb. It is constantly becoming. So it's not even a way of being, it's a process of becoming. And so the corporate then is really a living entity to enable that process of becoming. And that is quite a fundamental change from the corporate of the moment, which is a machine for managing, for controlling, for predicting, for taking a market and then holding on to it. This is quite different. This is about being able to sense, respond, and constantly upgrade and innovate.
Yes, no, I think that's brilliantly put, Giles. And that mindset shift to be able to even think about a corporate like that, let alone run one, that's going to be the challenge. That's why back to the human and the qualities and how we think is going to be more important than ever. Just the other day, I was actually with some regenerative people, or people who have been sort of dealing in that area, and yet there was still this desire somehow in, can we put everything on a 2x2 on a grid? And you can't put a living complex system on a grid. And so we're going to have to reinvent the tools by which we explain things and kind of move from wanting everything to be simple, hence a bottom line, even a triple bottom line, which is simple, to how do we explain things and how do we feel good about that complexity that is so needed. So it's fascinating. We're at a point in history where there's so much to be done and so much opportunity to shape what's coming that I'm quite excited.
Yeah, I mean, what I'd say on the mindset, I think you're right. I think right at the heart of this is this mindset shift. I mean, Peter Senge said, that's the number one most important thing facing our leaders today is this shift really in way of thinking. And yet what I'd say is, 'cause sometimes it can feel like, oh God, yet another thing. I'm in the middle of it now. I've got to deal with all of these things. I can't be dealing with this yet another thing. I think we need to kind of take it away from the head level and move it into our body. And into our way of being in reality, which is that it's not a new thing at all. What we're doing is we're liberating ourselves from a 2x2 matrix. We're liberating ourselves from a mechanistic structure that we devised so it would help us understand life better, but yet now is constraining our way of relating with life. So this isn't another thing. Oh my gosh, I've now got to learn about how nature works or whatever. This is actually a revealing of our humanity and bringing that in, so that, because as we get through that complexity, we realize that there's actually a beautiful simplicity within life.
Wow. Beautiful said. I love it. What you both said regarding this. Thank you. So I'm just asking the last questions to Louise, because we are an hour run out, so we could continue this conversation, and we will, some of us. So as the last question, I would like to ask you, what is for you actually creating a regenerative world? What really that means? And how do you personally and professional are doing that, kind of as wrapping up this whole thing? And what do you think that us at Amar na Vida could do it to contribute to that? And maybe the people that are listening to us, they learn a little bit how they can do it too.
Sure. So I'm not very good at preaching to how other people should do things. I think what you're doing is brilliant at the moment. So, but I can tell you what I've identified as, and Giles touched on it. It's that piece of really reconnecting with our own humanity, which sounds very woo-woo, but actually it's incredibly important to acknowledge the amount of data and intellectual knowledge you have, but somebody said to me, we can't create a regenerative world without AI, because the human brain hasn't got the capacity to deal with it. And on the surface of that, I was like, that's interesting, the complex living system, etc. But my conclusion is actually almost the opposite. AI will be a great technology, coming out of the tech world. I'm very excited about AI in a lot of ways, and it will be very helpful. But actually connecting with your own humanity is a much more powerful tool in being regenerative. So how do you do that? I do it by being in nature, which I think is incredibly important. And I know both you, Alamana Vida, and Giles have nature projects in two different parts of Europe, which is wonderful. And so one, connecting with nature, however you want to do that. Two, I talked about knowledge and learning, and I think really trying to put yourself in other people's shoes through, and that comes into the head again. So it's intellect, and absorbing that into the way we think and we are. So it's a lot, I think last time Giles and I were speaking together, I ended up talking about love. And I mean that, but it sounds a bit like, whoa, I've gone back to the 70s. But ultimately, so connecting with your own humanity, and that is both on a personal level, but even on a professional level, is allowing people to be the best they can be around you because they're whole humans. I think that's it. That's all I'm going to really say. I could talk about practical things. Look at where your finances are going. If you want to help the system, look at where your pensions are. Look at what your bank is doing, because quite frankly, that is going to be the biggest shift. If we all moved our money towards good projects, there would be enough money in the world, and we could do this. And yet I, day in, day out, meet entrepreneurs and companies who can't get the funding for their regenerative projects, and so we should every single person should go and talk to our pension providers, talk to our banks, and say, where do you put my money? I only want you to put it into regenerative. Thank you very much. And some of that work, and there are regenerative things we can put our money into. I'm working with the Commonwealth Regenerative Finance Working Group to figure out how do we make it easier, but they are there. So if you want a practical finance, be sustainable. Do less harm, but also go and pick up the shopping for the old lady down the road. That's contributing to your, listen to the children. All those very basic things. But practice not being black and white, because black and white is straight back into the 2x2 mechanistic matrix that we, as Giles beautifully said, has been very useful. And now we need to thank it for where it is and move on. To know that things are not black and white, that it's all about humanity. That's it.
Great. Love what you said. If people want to know more about the project, even Volans or stuff.
So volans.com, sign up for a newsletter, or email me, louise@volans.com. Easy peasy. Very happy to talk to anybody.
So thank you so much. You all.